It has been over 3 weeks since the botched presidential debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, which sparked absolute chaos for the Biden administration. It was no longer critics of the Democratic Party or certain media covering Joe Biden's decline. It was now visible for everyone. The cries for President Biden to step aside from his re-election bid grew even louder as the weeks went on. And then, despite denials, various reports suggested that Joe Biden would step aside over the weekend. And that's exactly what happened. On Sunday, President Joe Biden announced he would no longer be seeking re-election. Instead, he would finish up his term in January and is officially endorsing his Vice President Kamala Harris for 2024. Joining me now to discuss all that has unfolded in Washington is DC Correspondent for Unherd Emily Jashinsky. Emily, do you think it was the pressure from Democrats that finally saw Joe Biden agree to stand aside?
Yeah, from Democrats and especially from wealthy donors who had continued, a group of them had organized and continued to say that we weren't giving another dime to the Democratic Party unless Joe Biden stepped down. The other important thing to look at was the polls. The polls had just consistently been getting worse for Joe Biden the more he dug his heels in and refused to step down from the presidency. One thing that I think ultimately may have convinced him this was the right thing to do, he actually was diagnosed with COVID just a few days ago, and that's what culminated in him making that Sunday announcement. He had been convalescing in Rehoboth at his beach house when he made this decision, apparently. He was constantly throughout his presidency trying to compare himself with FDR, with other historic moments in American history. And I'm guessing someone told him, this is a historical opportunity to be the bigger man, to be serious, to be really recognized as selfless and sacrificial. And indeed, that's how we saw a lot of people on the left and a lot of top Democrats in the US react to the news yesterday.
I guess the question now is, Emily, is he even fit to serve until January?
No, I mean, he is not fit to serve as president of the United States. It's plainly obvious that if you can't run for president, you cannot serve currently as president. We've seen however many times him have meltdowns, not just on the debate stage, but he can't finish sentences at press conferences. He can't remember where he is in the middle of a thought. He's obviously not equipped to be president of the United States. And I actually would expect this not to diffuse or not to tamp down the calls for him to step down, but in fact, actually to escalate them. Because if it's Kamala Harris, every time she's on the campaign trail, or any Democrat for that matter, Republicans are going to force the issue every day and say, why aren't you calling for the 25th Amendment to get rid of a president who's incapable of doing the job? Why are you supporting Joe Biden continuing to be president? These questions are going absolutely nowhere. In fact, I think this makes them even more intense.
But I mean, they wouldn't even have the opportunity, Emily, because in a classic White House lack of transparency move and announcement, Joe Biden announced that he wasn't running for re-election on Twitter, regardless of the fact that most of his aides didn't find out until that announcement was made. It was not met with an immediate press conference or a photo op. What do you think that says about the state or the confidence that they have in the president?
Right. He said he would be making remarks later in the week. We don't know when that's going to happen, but it is incredibly unusual that they posted this on X without any press release, without any fanfare. I have absolutely no idea strategically what they were thinking with that decision, because it just makes no sense. Obviously, they don't want Joe Biden in front of cameras, because every time he's in front of cameras, he does things like say battle box instead of ballot box, or former Trump instead of Donald Trump, or former President Trump. It's every single time now, plus just the visual of him making an announcement why he's too old, or not too old, I guess too frail to serve another 4 years. He said he didn't want to be a distraction to the party. It's obviously concession that he's not up to the job for another 4 years. So anytime he's on camera, it just accentuates that and highlights that and makes it obvious for everyone to see.
I mean, we're mere weeks away from the Democratic convention where Joe Biden was actually going to be the official nominee for the 2024 election, which means that they wanted him in for another 4 years. Do you think that by him stepping down and by this enormous pressure that was put on him to step aside, do you think that it's now obvious that the White House has basically been gaslighting Americans for the last 3.5 years?
Absolutely. And what's worse is the media has been taking its cues from the White House, which we would see this kind of working in harmony together when the White House would say this video that makes Biden look bad is a cheap fake. And then you'd see people in the media like Nicole Wallace coming out and saying these are cheap fakes, just taking the line straight from the White House press office. So it's not just the White House, although I think that will hurt Democrats in this election cycle. They're all going to have to answer for it. I think what's even worse is that the American media said they were being bullied by the White House not to run stories about Biden's frailty, and it worked. So it's a really pathetic state of affairs over the last several years. I would say even the last 5 years since Joe Biden announced he was running. There were very obvious and serious questions here.
Well, moving on to Kamala Harris, the new, I guess, candidate, if you will. Do you think the VP has what it takes to win the election or even secure that nomination?
It's a really tough question because I think one thing Republicans are underestimating is just how desperate the media and people in Hollywood and some people in Wall Street and Silicon Valley are to defeat Donald Trump, meaning while Kamala Harris's favorable and unfavorable numbers are actually similar to Donald Trump's right now, she has a lower favorability rating than Donald Trump, although a lower unfavorability rating as well. Everyone is going to go into hyperdrive now, trying to kind of rehabilitate the image of Kamala Harris, who here in the US has been something of a meme laughing stock over the course of just the last year, as clips of her bad public speaking appearances, to say the least, have started to go viral in places like TikTok and Instagram. And so well, on the numbers wise, I mean, this is a woman who had tons of money going into the 2020 Democratic primary and didn't even make it to votes being cast. She didn't even make it to Iowa. That tells you a lot right there, running outside California. Even so, there's going to be a massive effort to kind of rehabilitate and boost the image of Kamala Harris. And people don't, Donald Trump is still very, very polarizing. There are still a lot of people who bitterly hate Donald Trump who will vote against him as long as there's like a sentient Democrat who doesn't seem like they're on their deathbed. So that will be powerful in and of itself.
I mean, we did see a lot of the Democrats and Hollywood members, as you say, immediately rally behind VP Harris, but you still have big Democratic names like Obama, Schumer, and Pelosi who have yet to endorse Harris. I mean, what does this look like? Does that show that there's not that much support, or I guess there's a little bit of confusion over if there's another member of the party that could actually throw their hat in the ring?
I think Democrats are really worried about looking as though they responded to, donor pressures, ousted Biden, and then installed a new candidate because, basically that's what they would be doing if they just all got behind Kamala Harris. They want it to look like there's some type of democratic process happening here. I think that's probably what Barack Obama is doing when he hesitates to endorse Harris right off the bat, because he actually said he wants to see a process play out. Now, whether that process is just a coronation for Harris ultimately and just for show is a different question. We still have to see what they're actually proposing. But I think the reason some top Democrats didn't go all in on Kamala Harris is that they want to look like they're not just selecting. The oligarchs aren't just selecting someone to sit in the seat. They want it to look like this is democratic and people had something of a say, and maybe it'll be the delegates. But basically, if all of the donors and top Democrats rally behind Kamala Harris, who else is going to get in the race? Everyone's going to be stuck with her anyway.
Well, say VP Harris does secure that nomination in the August convention, Emily, how savage do you think Republicans are going to be when they frame Harris as their competitor? In what areas do you think they're going to go after her?
There's so much for Republicans to work with because she's almost Clinton-esque in her vulnerabilities politically. She's been very, very close to, the corporate interests, special interests. She, I think, number one, is going to be pilloried as unserious because of all of the times she has talked down to people about Venn diagrams and school buses. This is all the meme narrative that people have come to associate with Kamala Harris. She has this radio show interview that's been circulated a lot just in the last 24 hours where she explained that Ukraine is a small country and Russia is a big country and Russia invaded Ukraine. So basically that's bad. I mean, she's just going to be hammered for being unserious, not up to the job, and a figurehead for corporate interests, which, as Trump nominated J.D. Vance last week, or picked J.D. Vance to be the nominee last week, it's going to be a populist battle. And Kamala Harris is not the right person for that moment.
Is she the right person for the presidency, though, Emily? If there was an election held today, Would she secure the vote?
There were an election held today. I do think Kamala Harris would lose to Donald Trump. He is coming off a convention bump and the horrific assassination attempt bump. So I think Donald Trump would beat her right now. But whether Kamala Harris, when she's officially the nominee, will benefit from the machine. Basically, this is the same machine that made everyone think Joe Biden was fine for 3 years, or made a lot of people think Joe Biden was fine for 3 years. That's going to kick into overdrive now, trying to convince everyone Kamala Harris is great and wonderful and should be the next president. So if you combine that with the polarized opinions on Donald Trump, who's never won the popular vote in a presidential election, he won the Electoral College in 2016. He's not the perfect candidate for Republicans either. He's a polarizing candidate. So it's going to be close, is my prediction, even if Kamala Harris is like one of the least likable people in politics.
Well, it's an unprecedented election campaign already, and it will only get even more so. Emily Jashinsky, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.